Good morning, my name is Dylan Phillips, and my thesis question is, how does gluten sensitivity in the United States attribute to immunodeficiencies in people 16 to 40? So, first, before getting to my argument, I have to give you some background information. So I have to explain why people are allergic to wheat. And it's not that they're allergic to wheat, that's why we don't use wheat allergy, we use wheat sensitivity. So the reason why we call it a sensitivity is just because your body is getting too much of it. So I'll use this example right here. This is dwarf wheat, or a genetically modified version of wheat, and this is regular wheat. As you can see, these are called earls. And you have several more earls per stalk, and there are about 10 to 15 stalks on each plant, compared to regular wheat. So I'm going to use an example to explain to you why gluten sensitivity has become more prevalent in the common day. So I'm going to use Jimmy Carter. Before Jimmy Carter, peanut farming wasn't as relevant as it was after his presidency because he subsidized it. As such, there weren't as many peanut allergies. So as you started using peanuts more and more in society, peanut butter, yada, 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 as you started using them more and more in your diet, you started seeing more and more allergies. The reason for this being that your body isn't made to handle as much peanuts as you're giving it. So some people develop an allergic reaction, some people develop cancerous materials from it, some people just give it to their epigenetics to say, hey, we're taking too much of it, let's make it stop. And sadly that leads to some conditions of people going to anaphylactic shock and generally being unhealthy because of their genetic factor. Okay, so next I have to explain to you what about processed food. So processed food is anything that's canned, bagged, or generally moved out into the population but in a majority cause. So I'm going to use the example of Cheetos. Cheetos are inherently gluten-free. But on the package it says may contain wheat, or may contain wheat or other wheat products. The reason for this being, in the plant that makes Cheetos, Cheetos could come into contact with gluten at any given point during their process. This means that people with gluten sensitivity like myself, this is very harmful because even the tiniest little bit of gluten can make me flare, which is a clinical term stating that your allergy is actually going off and that you've been ingesting and or exposed to wheat. And also, I will point this picture up here, as you can see right here, this is brown rice. A lot of brown rice in Asia, as many of you will know from history, was introduced into Asia. It has a gluten factor in it that's been worked into it over the centuries to make it more resilient. Because in nature, gluten is that molecule which gives grain and rye its structure. And so they added it into rice, which may fact you might not know. So, what is gluten sensitivity? As I explained before, gluten sensitivity is where your bowel breaks down because you're taking too much of it. So, as shown by this graph here, you can move from just having clinical symptoms, which are very light symptoms, to having full-blown celiac disease, which means you will flare every single time you have gluten. There's a factor there that when you're gluten sensitive, sometimes if you're exposed to cross-contaminated gluten, you won't flare. But then with celiac disease people, you will always flare because your bowel is just completely destroyed, and I will explain that later in my presentation. So the immune system gut connection. So 90% of your immune system is found inside of your gut. This is very important to realize when I'm moving into my gut bleeding argument. And it's very important to realize that your gut controls everything that goes on in your body. It controls your immune response, your hormonal response, and everything. In fact, I will take a quote from William Davis from his book, Wheat Belly. The gut is the key to all health. It is the key to the health of our body, our mind, and our spirit. And now I have to explain why immunodeficiencies accompany gluten sensitivity. So, when you're gluten sensitive, your gut is porous. This means that it has holes. The reason for this being is that gluten and your subsequent autoimmune attack has weakened the intestinal wall. This leads to some of the gluten coming out into your visceral tissue, which is the lining in between all of your organs. And this can lead, and this gut bleeding causes gluten to enter those areas where it's not supposed to be, so your immune system attacks it. And it attacks it and starts destroying healthy cells. And this can lead to diabetes, liver failure, lymphoma, just because the autoimmune response is attacking those cells. So a very common one among gluten-sensitive people is diabetes. The reason for this being it's very close to the stomach and other intestinal structures. So when the immune system attacks that area for gluten, it also attacks your pancreas, which makes it not work, thus you have diabetes. Also, osteoporosis leads to a lot of immunodeficiencies and cancers, which is an immunodeficiency, because that's where all your cells are made, inside of the bone, or the majority of your cells are made inside of the bone. So as gluten sensitivity attacks your bones, it makes them porous, more liable to break. It also attacks the stem cell creation inside your bones. As I will quote Dr. Sid Shreese-Williams, that if you have porous bones, that means not only your bone is breaking, but your marrow is breaking, which can lead to a lot of long-term effects. So, possible solutions. First off, as many of you might not know, a lot of flares can be helped by taking an acid or a digestive enzyme, but this just masks the problem. Really what's still happening is the gut bleeding problem, and antacids or digestive enzymes aren't helping that problem. Second, but there is an implication where antacids can break down the cellular wall of the stomach, causing more of a problem. The second possible solution I found was just transitioning back from dwarf wheat to actual wheat, like Magnanos, an ancient form of wheat that is from the Middle East, and we could roll back to it. The implication of this is that it isn't as resilient as dwarf wheat. That's the reason why we have dwarf wheat. Now, the best solution is just using your mind. So we all know how to cook. Well, sadly, the majority of Americans do not know how to cook, 55%. So the potential implications of this solution of just knowing what you're cooking and how you're cooking is that you miss out on this structure. Well, this is, as I will quote Sid Shreese-Williams again, this is a fabrication of companies to sell their products. It shows a very diverse, very milk, dairy, a very diverse subject inside of your diet, but you don't need this. In fact, I shouldn't be eating the same as an 8-year-old person, and they shouldn't be eating the same as me, because they're two different people. Dieting is a person-to-person exercise, as quoted by Sid Shreese-Williams. And how people in power and lawmakers should view this topic. So you can't make a law that says, no, you have to serve gluten-sensitive people. It doesn't work. So, but lawmakers should still take into account, even though you could subsidize these processes and subsidize cooking classes in school and making people more aware of what's in their food. And I will use a quote from Richard Nixon. We hear voices saying that it's immoral to live a materialistic and to strive for an even higher standard of living. I, being gluten sensitive, want a higher standard of living. I do not want to worry about my food being cross-contaminated. I don't want to worry about my next flare. I want to live a normal life. Thank you. And what are your questions?
Thank you, sir. All right, 2 questions that I have for you. First up, how valid and reliable were the different sources that you used, and then how did you know that they were?
Well, I commented a lot on William Davis and Sid Shreese-Williams. They are both on the GIF Council, which is the Gluten Intolerance Federation Council, which is the top leader in America of getting subsidization and general research for gluten sensitivity.
And then to follow up on that question, what about the stimulus articles?
Oh, the stimulus articles. I used Richard Nixon, and I was supposed to quote the long working hours lead to cancer article, but I ran out of time and didn't do
Okay, and then the next question I have for you. How did you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
So a lot of people came up to me and asked, but doesn't a gluten-free diet lead to cancer? Which is apparently a giant hoax that was sent out there. The thing is that there's a difference between a trend and an allergy. A preference and an allergy. And preference doesn't need to happen, and it generally leads to more carcinogens in your diet because sadly a lot of gluten-free foods are processed. So a lot of people that go gluten-free to lose weight generally tend to have a lot of processed foods. In fact, as stated by the North American Society for Processed Foods, 85% of foods you find in a common American pantry are processed. So really they just do gluten-free wrong. They buy more processed gluten-free foods instead of working towards a more natural diet.
All right, cool. Thank you.